Okay, so what do you think a giant, multinational corporation and a self-driving car have in common? I know, it sounds like the start of a really weird joke, right? But the answer, and you've got to hear this, it actually uncovers one of the biggest challenges we're facing today. So, let's dive into this wild parallel and try to unpack a huge ethical question. When these powerful, non-human things cause real harm, who or maybe what is actually responsible?
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get into that surprising parallel between corporations and AI. Then we're going to look at something called the responsibility gap, which is this dangerous space that opens up when things go wrong. From there, we'll ask, hey, could these systems ever actually be fit to be held responsible? And what would it even mean for them to have rights? And finally, we're going to get into the really big one, the consciousness question.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, a surprising parallel. So what's the real connection between a company boardroom and an AI's code?
Okay, so this is the core idea right here. On one side, you've got corporations. They're basically these organized groups of people, but they act like a single entity, totally separate from any one person inside them. And on the other side, you've got AI, systems that act on their own, separate from the people who program them. You see the pattern? In both cases, we're talking about these non-human, goal-oriented agents that are making huge waves in our world.
So what's the magic word that ties these two things together? Well, philosophers call it an intentional agent. It sounds fancy, but it's pretty simple. It's just anything that has something like beliefs about the world, has goals it's trying to hit, and can actually act on those beliefs to get to its goals. You know, a company wants to make more money based on what it thinks the market is doing. A trading bot wants to make a good trade based on the data it's seeing. They both fit the bill perfectly. And this is where it gets really wild. Check out this way of thinking about it. A corporation is basically a type of AI. Its hardware just isn't silicon chips and wires. It's the social structure. It's the departments, the org chart, the internal rules. The people are kind of like the processors, but the real agent is the system itself. It's a bit of a mind bender for sure, but it's a really powerful way to look at it.
Okay, now let's move on to Section 2, because this parallel leads to a really serious problem. This is where we run smack into something called the responsibility gap. When these powerful agents mess up, and I mean really mess up, who takes the blame? So just picture it for a second. An oil rig owned by a huge corporation causes a massive environmental disaster. Or maybe a fully autonomous AI that manages finances triggers a stock market crash. A ton of harm has been done, and our gut reaction, of course, is to find the person responsible. So who is it? The question seems so simple, but as you're about to see, the answer is anything but. Naturally, we start rounding up the usual suspects, right? If it was the AI, was it the programmer's fault? The company that owns it? The person who switched it on? If it was the corporation, do we blame the CEO, the board, the engineer who was on duty that day? But here's the kicker. This is the real puzzle. What if nobody was actually negligent? What if the programmers followed all the best practices? The managers made what seemed like reasonable decisions, and all the employees did their jobs exactly by the book? The truth is, these incredibly complex systems can cause huge failures that aren't the fault of any single person. And that is what the source calls the responsibility gap. A horrible thing happens, and we have this deep feeling that someone has to be held accountable. But when we look closer, we can't fairly pin all the blame on any one person. The responsibility just seems to evaporate into the complexity of the whole system. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. This quote here is from the official inquiry into a real disaster, the Herald of Free Enterprise ferry capsizing, where almost 200 people died. The investigation found that the company's entire culture around safety was just rotten. But trying to hold any one individual legally responsible in a way that matched the tragedy, it was almost impossible. It was a failure of the system, of the corporation itself. So, if blaming individual people doesn't always work, what's the answer? Well, Section 3 explores a pretty radical idea. What if we close that gap by holding the non-human agent, the corporation or the AI, responsible itself? But hold on, before we can even go there, we have to ask a more basic question. What does it even mean for something to be fit to be held responsible? I mean, we don't blame a hurricane for the damage it causes, right? So what's the difference here? The source suggests it comes down to 3 conditions. First, it needs moral agency, basically a moral compass, the ability to tell right from wrong. Second, it needs knowledge. It has to have the information it needs to make that moral judgment. And third, it needs control. It has to actually be able to choose what to do based on that judgment. So it's not just about being smart, it's about being able to make and act on moral decisions. And this leads to a really powerful idea for regulators. Maybe we just shouldn't allow these super autonomous systems, whether they're corporate structures or AI, to operate in really high-stakes situations unless we have intentionally built them to meet these conditions. We might literally need to engineer a conscience into the machine.
Now we are getting into some seriously deep water. Section 4, Rights Without a Soul. Okay, if we're going to give an AI responsibilities, wait a minute, does that mean we also have to give it rights?
To figure that out, we have to get this one critical distinction straight. There are two different kinds of rights. First, there are derivative rights. Think of these as practical tools. We give a company the right to own property so it can, do business. Then there are non-derivative rights, like human rights. These are intrinsic. They exist because the being itself has moral value.
So, the proposal is this. We could, theoretically, give AI systems legal personhood and some of those derivative rights. Why? For purely practical reasons, so it can sign a contract or be insured or be sued. This is completely, totally different from saying it has fundamental, human-style moral rights. It's just a legal tool, not a moral declaration.
And that brings us to our final and maybe most mind-blowing question in Section 5, the consciousness question. What would it actually take for an artificial system to earn that deeper, true moral status?
So we figured out that these systems can be intelligent. They can be agents. But there's still obviously a massive difference between them and us, or even other animals. The source argues that the secret ingredient isn't just about being a better or faster decision maker, it's something else entirely.
That secret ingredient might just be this: phenomenal consciousness. It's the idea of having a subjective, first-person experience. The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" The whole point is, there is something it feels like to be a bat, but there's almost certainly nothing it feels like to be a spreadsheet program.
So the argument goes that this capacity for subjective experience, the what it's like to be, that's the ticket. That's the price of admission for getting those intrinsic non-derivative rights. Now, today's AIs and corporations, they don't have it. But, and this is the critical part, as new technologies that mimic the human brain come online, we can't be so sure that future systems won't.
And that leaves us right here with this one last absolutely startling question. If we do, one day, create an AI that doesn't just process data, but actually has a subjective experience, if there is truly something it is like to be that AI, what then? What moral duties will we, its creators, have towards it? That sounds like sci-fi, but it's a question we probably need to start thinking about right now.